Right, guys. Share the link, please. First of all, good morning. Hold on. Yeah, that one. I don't know if I can do it, but we'll try. Hold on. Hold on. I'm here. Just give me a sec. Hold on. Just trying that. Oh, this heart. It's a pain in the neck. This heart is crucifying YouTube. You know, you've got a stupid heart, so you can't see the menu button and you can't see all the comments. It's absolutely ludicrous. Anyway, I will be back. Hope you all remembered to put your clocks back an hour. It's 9:15, not 10:15. Right, guys. Allegedly, and it's already on the web, on his profile. Unfortunately, yesterday we lost Matthew Perry from Friends at 54 years old. Yeah, okay. I'll read out some of the comments. Oh, rest in peace, Chandler Bing. Oh, that was his friend's name, was it? I knew it was Chandler, but I didn't know his last name was Bing. Yeah, I didn't know it was Matthew. What is it? I knew him was Matthew Perry, but I didn't know him was Chandler Bing. I knew he was Chandler, plus the other stuff he did, of course. Well, that's what happens when Hollywood goes on strike. Hold on. Over here, guys. Post your questions. Hey guys. I'm just posting about Matthew Perry. We knew him, Chandler. The idiot on the sea. Oh no, that was the other one. No, that's the other one, isn't it? It means extra to me because I used to live in New York, so I understand where they're all coming from. Telling you, this is nonsense. What makes me laugh about threads is people post once and then they don't bother. They think everyone's going to look at their post, they're going to reshare it, they're going to like, they're going to comment, but nothing happens. When I post to 30 million people, you know? Every time someone posts below my comment, not below my comment, but what I mean is I post a comment, then they post their comment, which goes above mine. I post it on theirs, you know? Because the only way you get seen on the web is by posting, being active. People think, oh, I'll post once and I'll be a millionaire tomorrow. But it doesn't happen. You've got to be seen. It's like when I was a sales and marketing manager, my team had to knock on 100 doors each to get 10 appointments. Out of that 10 appointments, they get one sale. And if they got one sale a day, they get 7 sales a week, which would earn them about £700 a week because they get about 100 quid per sale. Well, about 110. So about 170, £770 a week plus 300, 300 basic. So they'd be taking home about £1,000 a week. if I'd been in London yesterday and the roads had been blocked by the protesters, I'm telling you now, I'd have run them. I'd have run them out. I'd have run them over. Because you stop my team from making £5,000 a week, I'll run you over. Because that yesterday was complete nonsense. They completely blocked St Thomas's Bridge off. Opposite the House of Commons on the A3, there's a bridge that goes over the Thames. That bridge on the left side is the House of Commons, House of Lords. Right? On the right-hand side is St Thomas's Hospital, one of the major hospitals in London. And they cut it off. Hundreds of people will die yesterday because people couldn't get to the hospital, ambulances couldn't get to the hospital, and it's nonsense. Matthew Perry died yesterday, 54-year-old. It's pretty bad. 54. It's younger than me. I didn't know he was younger than me. I thought he was older than me. God, when he started Friends, he must have been like 19, 20. Not even that. Peace Perry, I put peace as in P-I instead of P-E. Never mind. I'm sure Matthew won't mind. He'll be looking down on me, laughing. Friends is only repeats now anyway, so I don't know anything else Matthew Perry did. Comment below what he did. Yeah, I hope you put your clocks back. It's only 9:30, even though it feels like 10:30. Not much going on. There's loads going on. Tell you what, my posts will be getting threads active. I don't see anyone post like I do. They post one and they run. That's it. I'll post while I'm on the toilet and then I won't come back to threads again. It's nonsense. Peace, Perry. I put peace, P-I-E-C-E. What a Wally. Wow. I can make anything interesting with music. Can't make my YouTube channel interesting with music because you get copyright strike. So I guess all the news will go from Gaza now, and it'll be all about Perry all day long. All the TV channels will cash in on it. All the TV channels will cash in on it. Let's make as much money as we can out of the death of Matthew Perry. The media make me sick. Oh, well, let's pay tribute to Matthew Perry. No, we're not paying tribute to Matthew Perry. We're just monetizing his death and making as much money as possible out of it. It's nonsense. All the TV channels now at BBC One, BBC Two, BBC Three, BBC Four, ITV 1, 2, 3, 4. They'll all be doing tributes to Matthew Perry, showing trends for the next 6 months, so they make millions of pounds out of his death. It's disgusting.
A consequence of a world in which many emerging powers are headed, in which China is now the lender of first resort in much of the global south, in which 2/3 of the countries in the world trade more with China than they do with the United States. And so a country like India, like South Africa, Nigeria, Brazil, Indonesia, they don't want to take sides in what looks like a new era of East-West rivalry. And as a consequence, they're sitting on the fence, even though I think this is a war that is very clearly a war of aggression against Ukraine.
To be honest, I hated friends.
Ethically and morally should band together against Russia. In the case of Israel's war with Hamas, I think it's more complicated in the sense that the Israel-Palestine conflict is one in which there are diverging opinions about morality, about ethics, about legality, about human rights that have divided the United States and many other parts of the world for quite a long time. And I think that's what we're seeing play out here. I think given the nature of the atrocities that Hamas carried out on October 7th, Israel is seen as having a right to defend itself and having the right to respond with force. How this conflict...
My Hamas terrorist recording got 80 views from my website. Chandler's death has got 1. That's how much people care. They care more about terrorists than they do a celebrity. Oh dear. It's nonsense.
From your experience, do you think Israel can go through the steps it wants to do right now in destroying Hamas in the way it's doing it and not have this
boo 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 boo
significant in terms of numbers and scale?
I've got no idea what's happened in Gaza overnight, so drop comments below.
Going to Israel in the middle of the conflict, providing military assistance to Israel, but at the same time being very explicit and saying, don't be blinded by rage. Don't make the same mistakes that the United States did after 9/11.
Oh, this is a repeat.
Intervened in Afghanistan and Iraq and Libya and Syria and in many more chaos than stability. And I think it's a wise warning to Israel, because Israel is
if 7,000 to 9,000 people have been killed in Gaza, how come we've only seen about 3 or 4 funerals?
on both sides. The United States learned the hard way in Iraq that military force is good at destroying things, but not very good at creating desired political outcomes.
Oh, I agree with that.
So I think
The United States are very good at destroying things, but not at building things. Look at the web. Look at YouTube. Look at Meta. Look at TikTok, Twitter. All fail because they only want to destroy lives. They don't want to make lives better. Why is my TV flashing?
We have Wang Yi right now, as you and I are talking in Washington, the foreign minister of China. He said he believes that Israel's actions have now gone beyond the level of self-defense and response.
China have said Israel's actions now have gone beyond self-defense. Oh, that's brilliant news. But then China needs to shut up, because look at the human rights violations in China, in the slave camps, slave prisons.
Geopolitical and geoeconomic stability. And even though they sided with Putin and supported, at least nominally, Russia's war against
Pay me £50.
I'm not sure
I'll advertise your site
gain for China. And that's again because
daily for a month, and I'll build your business.
economic decoupling, and it's intensifying China's rivalry with the United States and the West. But I think you're right, Steve, that what China is doing here is in some ways attempting to stay out of these conflicts, yet at the same time exploit them to increase its standing in the global South, to play the role of the country that's standing up to Western hegemony. And in some ways, I think it's irresponsible in doing so, because it is aiding and abetting Russia's aggression against Ukraine. And rather than trying to play a more constructive role in the Middle East, whether it's helping to negotiate the release of hostages, figuring out how to limit damage, getting humanitarian assistance into Gaza, it's attempting to, in some ways, exploit the issue to try to raise its profile in the global South. And in some ways, I think as a consequence, its position is going to further inflame the tensions that we see out there between the West, the United States on the one hand, China on the other.
Charlie, I want to play a sound clip for you from Secretary of State Tony Blinken. Heat, water, electricity for children, the elderly, for the sick. These are President Putin's new targets. He's hitting them hard. This brutalization of Ukraine's people is barbaric.
Why is Blinken at NATO?
Hypocrisy of the moment.
Like NATO are going to take any notice of him.
Devices being used to turn something off and are not being able to talk about it with regard to Israel, and then trying to help the other side. Why the response is so
If the US carry on the way they are, they will be expelled from NATO. Then America have got a serious problem.
Israel, how it prosecutes this war. As we were speaking about a few minutes ago, Mr. Biden said very clearly, don't make the same mistakes we did. Don't be blinded by rage. So I think this is a work in progress. But given that the attacks on October 7th were over the top, were atrocities, now you have women, children, grandmothers kidnapped, being held hostage in Gaza, I think one can understand to some extent Israel's rage and Israel's response. But I do think that there is a middle ground here, and that involves a careful but strong military operation against Hamas leadership, against Hamas fighters, against the tunnels, the weapons depots, with, at the same time, efforts to protect civilians, to get food, fuel, water, medicine into Gaza so as to diminish and minimize the humanitarian emergency that is inevitably unfolding when Hamas decides to use its own Palestinian brethren as human shields.
I guess my question to you is about the tyranny of inertia and the vested interests that build up that don't want to see progress on these, fragile geostrategic hot points. Is that part of the game we have to accept, that we're always going to have certain nodes in the world that continually erupt like this?
Well, as my friend and colleague Richard Haas.
No one's coming to this room because you all know I won't let you troll it, I won't let you spam it, and I won't let you talk nonsense.
Peace in the region, trying to get rapprochement between long-standing adversaries, it is very difficult business. I take my hat off to President Obama.
Anyway, I need to put the computer off, put the TVs off, but I need to go clean the kitchen.
To decrease the animosity with places like Iran and Cuba, and he did to some extent succeed, and to some extent he didn't succeed. But I do think we have to keep trying. And Steve, we know from history that peace does break out, right? The French and the Germans were killing each other for centuries. You now drive from France to Germany and you see no border crossing. The United States has a relationship with its neighbors in which the prospect of war is unthinkable, not in the realm of the possible. Pockets of peace do emerge. And so I think when it comes to the relationship between Israelis and Palestinians, when it comes to the relationship of the United States and China, we have to keep trying to push things in a positive direction.
America is a pretty safe country to live because no one can get to it. If Russia wanted to attack America, they'd have to come through Canada. That's why the UK is a safe country, because, again, no one can get to us. To get to the UK, you've got to go through dozens of countries first to get anywhere near us. Same with America. You've got to go through Canada, which would never happen.
President Biden's National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan just published a 7,000-word article in Foreign Affairs and is focusing on the future of the world and America's place in it. One of the lines of many is that the world is becoming more contested, and the United States cannot talk only with those who share its vision or values. And it made me wonder whether or not, as you sort of look at what Jake Sullivan is trying to communicate, is this a moment of realism where America is finally beginning to understand the limits of its power and capabilities that is in
America has no power now.
With other players with which it may not get along in different, because I haven't seen that as part of the
America has no authority in the world whatsoever, no? No one cares for America.
I would start by quoting the first sentence in Jake's very interesting article, and that first sentence was, "Nothing in international politics is inevitable." And I would take issue with that analysis because I think some things are inevitable. Number one, change in the distribution of power. Right? We go back to the 1700s and we saw power in the world shift from the east to the west. And Europe and North America together have been at the top of the heap, leading the pack for quite some time. We now see power beginning to shift from west to east and from north to south. That's going to make the world more difficult, more unpredictable, more uncertain. The United States is not going to be able to call the shots in the same way that it used to. We're going to have to get used to a multipolar world. We're going to have to get used to pluralism and ideological diversity, because that's the world that we're headed toward. That seems to me to be inevitable. That having been said, I would agree with Jake that there's a lot of room for taming that world and channeling a more decentered world in a positive direction. But it will take working across geopolitical and ideological dividing. We now live, Steve, in a world that is more interdependent and globalized than ever before. Many of the challenges that we need to face, both as a country and as international citizens, require broad-based global cooperation. And that means working with countries with whom we may not share the same principles and the same values. I think the Biden administration got off to a more ideological start than was probably advisable. Democracy versus autocracy, with us or against us. Now I think it's realizing it needs a more tactical approach. I do think that behind the scenes, the United States has been reaching out to China. We've seen a steady set of efforts of cabinet officials to head to China. Jake Sullivan has twice in the recent past met with the Chinese leadership. I think there's a sense that we don't want to go down the rabbit hole of a new culture.
We don't want to go down the rabbit hole. Yeah, we do. We want to go down the rabbit hole and we want to find the Hamas fighters and kill them.
Even if we may disagree with them about human rights, about democracy, and even about geopolitical issues in East Asia.
Let me just ask you finally, in political science, we learn about, particularly in foreign policy, the continuity typically of policies from one administration to the next administration, regardless of political party. But it seems like that world is gone. And particularly when you look at a country like Iran, and if you were basically to say in your calculation that we should sit down and talk to Iran, we've had a zigzag in those policies. Do you think, as you look at the situation in America right now, which is part of that topsy-turvy dimension that you started with at the beginning, do you suspect that we're not going to have continuity in American foreign policy any longer, that we're going to continue to see zigzags and instability in the way we approach and engage the world?
Well, Steve, this zigzag and erratic statecraft that you're referring to is new. If you go back to the Cold War, really beginning with FDR, 1941, Pearl Harbor, Democrats and Republicans came together, and there was a broad, ideologically centrist, bipartisan compact that stood behind a steady brand of American statecraft. Those days are gone, mainly because we've seen the hollowing out of the political center in the United States. And as a consequence, when power changes hands in Washington from Democrat to Republican, you get wild swings in foreign policy. I think that is likely to continue depending upon who wins the next election, simply because there is a fundamental ideological cleavage along partisan lines about America's role in the world. For me, I think the key here is rebuilding the American political center from the ground up. Strength in the United States starts at home. And I think key to our future, both our domestic future and our ability to play a purposeful and effective international role, is rebuilding bipartisanship, rebuilding consensus. That is going to take getting working Americans back up on their feet.
Well, we'll have to end it there. Georgetown University Professor Charles Kupchan, Senior Fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations, thank you so much for joining us today.
Steve, it's been my pleasure to join.
So what's the bottom line? Beneath all this analysis, global strategy and U.S. support for Israel and Ukraine, and Russia testing the West, and the role of non-state actors, beneath all of that are real people and real families. One of our colleagues here at Al Jazeera The bureau chief in Gaza just lost 4 members of his family after an Israeli airstrike hit what Israeli officials said was terrorist infrastructure. Wael Dakdu's family had already fled northern Gaza, as the Israelis had warned people to do, but they were killed anyway after fleeing south. This is real. Wael has lost most of his family, and there are thousands of other innocent people on both sides of this conflict who've lost their families this month. Yes, we should be thinking through policies and global crises and asking how we got here. But sometimes it's just time to give our sincere condolences to those who've just lost loved ones. And that...
I'm not giving any condolences to those that have lost loved ones. Tough. If you were dumb enough to go to a party on the border with Gaza and get kidnapped, that's your own stupid fault. Don't expect sympathy from the world. You know, if you live on the border with Gaza, again, you get rocket attacks. Don't expect sympathy from the world. Again, if you're an unmarried mother with kids, don't expect sympathy from the world, because as they said to us in the armed forces, that's a self-inflicted injury. You brought it on yourself. You moved to an area that you knew was unsafe. You had kids you knew were being born in a war zone. You know, you don't have a kid and then live right next to the border with Israel, get bombed, and then expect the world to feel sorry for you. You know, as I said, there should be a 10-mile exclusion zone from both sides of the border, like North Korea and South Korea. There's a exclusion zone, or as they call it, a demilitarized zone, so they can do the same with Israel and Gaza, Israel and Lebanon. Yeah. Don't ask for sympathy when you climb into the lion's cage and get bit.
Upfront takes on the big issues. This isn't a one-off. He's talking about a systemic issue here. Black lives don't really matter. Unflinching questions. Is war with Rwanda imminent? Rigorous debate. People are dying because of lack of medical treatment. Challenging conventional wisdom. The fact that people are starting to get angry about this is in itself a sign of progress. Join me, Mark Hill, for Upfront on Al Jazeera.
You know, I'm not saying everyone's guilty and are going to be Hamas terrorists, grow up to be Hamas terrorists, but there's a lot of people in Gaza that have been killed because they've hit apartment blocks that have had Hamas supporters or staff, or as you see from my website, terrorist training camps. Now, what the US and Israel need to do is find these camps and destroy them.
Dozens more are injured. And Israel's Prime Minister warns the war on Gaza will be long and difficult, and says Israeli forces are expanding.
That didn't work. What happened there?
From Sydney to New York.
Like all these idiots in London yesterday, all they did was brought St Thomas's Hospital bridge to a standstill, which means nothing could get in or out of the hospital. That's outrageous. I don't even know how the police allowed them to take that route. It's disgusting.
On the ground, the UN says civil order is collapsing. Now, these are just some of the scenes where thousands of desperate Palestinians have resorted to breaking into distribution centres in Gaza.
Oh, yeah, they did break into the distribution centre in Gaza yesterday. They broke into the distribution centre and stole all the aid. So now people haven't got anything. Because you can bet your life this wasn't normal people breaking in. This was Hamas. Now they've got all the food. This is exactly why Israel said, no, we're not going to allow aid.
We have no flour, no aid, no water, not even toilets. Our houses.
Oh, right. We have no food, we have no flour, we have no water, we have no aid. Well, he doesn't look like he's been starving for a week. 2 weeks.
Israel and Gaza say Israeli troops are now fighting Hamas units in multiple locations within the Strip. Some phone and internet services have now been restored after Israel knocked out most communications on Friday. The UN says the situation is dire, with no part of Gaza considered safe. Well, since the war began on October the 7th, Israel's bombing campaign across the territory has killed 7,703 Palestinians.
Luckily, the 500,000 people protesting in London yesterday don't speak for the 9 to 10 million people that live in London.
More than 1,400 Israelis were killed in Hamas's attack 3 weeks ago. Al Jazeera's Hani Mahmoud joins us now from Khan Yunis inside the Gaza Strip. Let's just begin with the uncertainty around the communications blackout and how that impacted on UN depots where supplies were being stored, broken into. What's the latest on that?
That had absolutely nothing to do with the communications blackout. That was raided before even Israel started the bombardment on Friday. Hold on, let me turn this on. Well, they're raiding it during the day. It's not blackout.
Gaza was taken completely off the grid and leaving people with fear and concern and speculations about atrocities are going to take place at that time. What it did actually, it impacted people negatively in terms of staying connected or being online just to see the latest updates of what's going to happen or where is the next safe place to run to. In addition to that, it hinders operation aids on the ground as United Nations. The ground team could not coordinate their activities and delivery of aid on the ground, in addition to hindering the work of the Red Cross in terms of responding to appeals of people who are either...
Why did Al Jazeera report so many lies? They're now blaming Israel for the raid on the Red Cross distribution point, food, etc. Oh, hold on, my telly's froze. My telly picture's froze. How the hell can the telly picture froze? It's not a computer.
Offers services to both the north and the southern part of Gaza, and because that damage and installations is hard to replace at these difficult times now, they refer to alternatives just to connect people, and that explains why for the most part a phone call would connect after 5 or 7 tries, or even a simple text would take you several attempts to send it.
Okay, Hannah, you've been able to sort of give us a complete update on the communication side of things. And again, we'll just focus back in.
How about use Bluetooth?
And of course, those UN storehouses that were broken into.
You send by Bluetooth 300 people can get it at the same time.
Couldn't communicate with its own on-the-ground officers who
Everybody logs onto your Bluetooth, you send them the file, they accept it, job done. Then they do it, they pass it on to another 300 people. You know, it's not rocket science. It's just Al Jazeera talking bullshit is normal. I've actually got the evidence that Gaza has water, fuel, food, communications, and everything else. I've actually, if you go to my website, I've actually got the proof on my website. You know, at the end of the day, am I going to believe the IDF or am I going to believe Al Jazeera? Sorry, I'm going to believe security services.
And water supplies and everything that they need for day-to-day activities. Now, UNRWA has stated, I believe it was the UNRWA commissioner who said it that.
Well, if they've all got aid, there won't be any more trucks going in. The aid agency will see or less of them raiding the distribution hub, and they'll say, right, we're not bringing any more aid in, and they can all starve. They can live off their sheep.
People who are in the streets or people evacuated to other areas, they find it difficult.
Sheep, scorpions, whatever else lives in the desert.
Of food or water supplies. We've seen people queuing for long hours just to get a gallon of water, or in front of bakeries for a pack of bread.
Well, they don't need to queue in front of bakeries now for bread, do they? 100 grams of flour, 100 mils of water, and they can make fresh bread. Put it in a frying pan over a fire, 3 or 4 minutes each side. You've got fresh bread. There you go. Get on with it. Water, go drink the med. They're just thugs.
Alan Fisher reports from occupied East Jerusalem.
Despite growing calls for a ceasefire,
you know, by Al Jazeera showing this nonsense, they're not doing Gaza any favour. If you think in London yesterday there was 500,000 people protesting for Palestine, but these were all foreigners. They were probably legal immigrants in the UK that shouldn't even be here. So no one's going to take any notice of the protests in London, especially when they see one of the most important hospitals in London being blocked off. Can't get in it. When you come up from Guildford or Woking to London to get to St Thomas's, which is an emergency care hospital and a very important ICU unit, you come flying down the A3 at 70, 80, 90 miles an hour, you screech to a halt outside St Thomas's, you do a U-turn, you park on the bridge right outside St Thomas's Hospital, you leg it into the A&E, and then you're admitted into a ward. Or if you don't want to go to A&E because your doctor's already spoke to the hospital, you go straight up to the medical admissions unit. All these people did yesterday was completely destroyed their own lives. Now, I hope some of them needed medical attention yesterday and they died because of the protest. Because I've got no sympathy for people that actually block off a hospital. If you look at the pictures on the TV, you will see the House of Commons, you will see the bridge, then you see a big building. That big building is St Thomas's Hospital, one of the most important hospitals in London. It's like people going into Grimsby protesting all the way along Scather Road and blocking off Scather Road Hospital. Well, as it's called now, Princess Diana Hospital. I'd run them over.
October 7 attack for not being able to prevent it. And then soon after in the morning, I guess, when some of his cabinet members saw it, they tweeted about it saying that this has crossed a red line. He had Benny Gantz, one of the war cabinet members and also a former defense minister, asking him to retract it. You had the leader of the opposition, Yair Lapid, saying that this has crossed a red line. Then after that, we saw that Netanyahu did delete it, and then he apologized publicly for it. This has been happening all in the public sphere on social media. He said that he had made a mistake. Interestingly, he apologized for the tweets and said that we are together in this, in the war, and that he will ensure that they are staying united, but hasn't yet, so despite criticism, apologized himself or taken any of the blame for not being able to prevent that attack at a time when this unity, so-called unity government, is supposed to be united in times of war. Benny Gantz himself said that in war, the leadership has to take responsibility and help move this country and war forward off the back of that attack.
Well, while the war continues, as far as Israel is concerned, the military has been speaking about sort of the latest situation, developments on the ground in Gaza. What have they been saying, Sarah?
Yeah, well, I'll get to that in a moment. We have been hearing in the distant thuds, which means that the Iron Dome has been intercepting some of those rockets that are being sent over from Hamas into central Israel and areas close to Tel Aviv. Earlier in the morning, that was in the southern borders. So Hamas is still keeping up with those rockets. But we have heard from the military a statement earlier where they had confirmed that a couple of their soldiers were injured, but what he was saying is that there's an expansion of the number of troops that have been sent in the last 48 hours. And also he said that they had targeted 450 Hamas targets, with a warning once again for those in the north to move to the south. But interestingly, he spoke about the humanitarian aid, and part of his warning telling them to move to the south was that as of Monday, he said more humanitarian aid will be allowed in. Of course, Israel is controlling that border as well, Rafah border with Egypt, and it's been up to them whether they allow more aid in. And he said that's going to be happening from Monday.
Sarah Kayat for us there in occupied East Jerusalem. Thank you. Let's cross over to Yumna Al-Said, our correspondent who's in Gaza City and joins us now on the phone. Yumna, good to speak to you under what is very difficult situations, not just for our correspondents in Gaza, but also for the public at large. Just give us an idea what the last 24 hours has been like with communication links literally broken.
Well, it's definitely...
Notice they're not saying Israel brought it down anymore, because Israel didn't bring it down, and you will see that next weekend, because next weekend my internet will go down, not because it's been taken down, but because of all the fireworks next weekend.
Or even the health centers and health facilities being able to reach...
Guy Fawkes night is... Give me a sec. Yeah, Guy Fawkes night is Sunday night again. Okay. Guy Fawkes night is Sunday night again, which means Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday night we will have fireworks.
The communications come back, although they have come back, or they're coming back gradually. The signals are still very much weak. We are trying to get connected to the internet, which comes and disappears every now and then. The Wi-Fi are still...
Well, you talk right, and so it's...
Some of them in some areas were restored, while other areas are still not, they're not able to restore them. Now, of course, the communications company in the Gaza, a couple of times, is saying that it is working under very difficult situation, and that is true in light of all this ongoing bombardment and the airstrikes in the air, and also the drones have already in normal times affect very much the communication in Gaza. They're trying in these very difficult and harsh conditions to restore the lines that were completely destroyed because of the Israeli heavy bombardment 2 days ago on the entire communication south of the Gaza Strip.
Of course, communication's now to one side. Everybody's a human being, and when you can't speak to somebody, there is a psychological impact. How have people been able to cope with that? For those that are around you, for those that you've witnessed, that you've talked to, both young and old?
Well, let me just give you a very simple idea. Like for me, for example, not being able to communicate with my family and check with them on them inside Gaza or those outside, not being able to reach me while they see on television these heavy bombardments going on, it was really a terrifying feeling. It makes us feel like we're really going insane. One of the people here around me who have their families scattered in other areas in different areas of the strip didn't know what had happened to their families, if they got bombarded. It's not because the airstrikes were very, very violent in the past 2 days. They were across the Gaza Strip, but we did not know exactly where. And that was a very intense psychological impact on the people here. Also, many of the people were worried because what if something happens to us? What if we get bombarded and then we can't call civil defense, we can't call emergency team, we can't. So that was a constant concern and a very difficult situation for the people who lived these moments, when we say terrifying hours and days, not just moments. But what we've also seen is that after the communications have come in the daylight, when people started to go out today and see and investigate, they found a lot of people who were killed. They were in the streets. No one even reported or was able to report that these people were bombarded, or in that area it was bombarded, or their home was targeted and they were completely killed. And this is just an image of the reality that happened in these 2 days that we were completely cut off. Now, we don't know if these people were killed in the first day or the second day, but surely they have been bombarded, their bodies killed, were lying on the ground, and the Ministry of Health said that it has seen this scene in different areas, with even some of the bodies completely ripped off and lying there, and no one was able to communicate with civil defense teams to call for help in these areas.
Yumna, safe for starring in Gaza City. Thanks, Yumna. Keeping in touch. Now, in the occupied West Bank, at least 3 Palestinians have been killed during Israeli raids overnight. Imran Khan is live for us in Ramallah in the occupied West Bank. And the death toll in Iran in the West Bank has been mounting too. Just talk us through the latest figures.
Well, we're at 114 people who have died since October the 7th. In the last 12 hours overnight in the Asghar refugee camp, a 25-year-old Palestinian was killed there and 10 others wounded. In the town of Tamoum in Tubas, a 32-year-old Palestinian was killed and 7 others injured there. And in Bet Rima in Ramallah, a 30-year-old Palestinian was killed and 11 others injured there. The difference is now is that the Israelis are mounting multiple raids in multiple locations. That never really happened before. It was always kind of one raid in one location. But now, say the Israelis, the gloves are off in the occupied West Bank. But the arrests are actually increasing as well. 35 arrests overnight, just to give you a sense of what that actually means. There's 6,600 Palestinians in prison in Israeli jails. Some 1,590 of those have been arrested since October 7th. And 1,800 of them, have actually being held under administrative detention. They're being held without charge. So the numbers are increasing every single day.
And of course, the diplomacy continues, not so much under the radar, but you might say out of view of the cameras as well.
That's absolutely right. The Bahraini foreign minister, Zanania, actually arrived in Ramallah today on a surprise visit. We didn't know he was coming. He flew in from Jordan, where he met the king on Saturday, and they had talks there. He then flew in on Jordanian helicopters, landed in Ramallah, and then spent a few hours, we understand, with Mahmoud Abbas, the Palestinian president, bringing with him a message of solidarity to the Palestinian people. However, this is very interesting because he's not going to Israel. Bahrain actually has relations with Israel, full diplomatic relations with Israel. Israel has an embassy in Bahrain. This was all signed during the Abraham Accords. Now, the more cynical political observers here are suggesting that the foreign minister is actually coming with a message from Netanyahu. That's the level of kind of mistrust there is over any kind of diplomatic visit here, but particularly one that comes from Bahrain, which has never had real diplomatic relations with Palestine.
Imran Khan in Ramallah, thank you. Now, Hamas's leader in Gaza, Yahya al-Sinwar, says the group is ready for an immediate prisoner swap with Israel. According to the Palestinian Prisoners Society, 6,600 Palestinians are being held in Israeli jails, including hundreds of children. It says 60 detainees are women and 15 are journalists. 1,800 are held without charge under so-called administrative detention. In 2022, the number was 860. Since Hamas's attacks on October the 7th, 1,590 Palestinians have been detained. Before the conflict, more than 5,000 Palestinians were held in Israeli jails. That's the highest number in the past 2 decades. Let's bring in Abdullah Al-Aryan. He's an associate professor of Middle East history at Georgetown University here in Qatar. Good to have you back with us on the programme. Let's just talk about the prisoner swap and the whole deal around this and how important it is in terms of part of the mediation, but also part of the negotiation to try and find a settlement to what's going on in Gaza right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think that context is really significant. So thinking specifically about the number of Palestinians who are being held in Israeli prisons, this is something that goes back quite a ways. We've seen in the past deals that were made for Israeli soldiers that were captured, by some of these different movements, and of course trying to then swap them for. In one case, at least one soldier was swapped for over 1,000 Palestinians who were being held under these kinds of conditions that we've seen. And so I think there is a idea in place to try to do something similar. And just today we were seeing reports that the families of the Israeli captives have come out and said they're fully in support of the idea of a mass swap that involves freeing all of the captives that are being held in Gaza, as well as then the Palestinian prisoners that are being held by Israel.
This is not the first time that talk about a prisoner swap has occurred, and we've seen past examples of this happen between Israel and armed groups. However, it's perhaps unique that Israeli families are so very vocal, and that pressure is reflected in the way society at the moment views what's going on and the action they need from their own government.
Well, I think there's a real fear given the scale of the devastation that's unfolding in Gaza right now. When we think about this mass aerial bombardment, I mean, it's unprecedented in many ways. We've seen similar campaigns in the past, but this is really the first time that we're seeing it on this level of the destruction and devastation. And we know, of course, what this means for everyone in Gaza, and that includes the captives. We have seen reports, unconfirmed, of course, about the number of captives that may have died as a result of Israelis bombarding Gaza. And so, of course, the families are being very vocal about the fact that they don't see this as a solution to the crisis that's unfolding right now. And certainly they'd like to see, if not a ceasefire, at least something of a swap that would then at least result in freeing all of the captives again, both those in Gaza and then, of course, the Palestinians that are being held as well.
For international viewers, just to clarify from Hamas, from what we've understood and heard, that they are willing to allow the civilians to return back to Israel, but there is an impasse somewhere in the negotiations, somewhere along the line. A lot of these negotiations happen behind closed doors, under the radar. There's a lot of diplomatic flurrying going on. We saw the Secretary General make an unscheduled pit stop here in Doha before he went off to Nepal. there's a lot of moving parts to this when it comes to the release of either military captives or civilian captives.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've already seen two waves of the release of two separate incidents where two women were released. I think this signaled at least the idea that there was a desire, at least a willingness, to release all of the captives who were civilians, especially those who are holding foreign passports, given obviously the intervention, as you mentioned, of a number of other concerned states, and that this is being treated as kind of a separate process from that of the possibility of a prisoner exchange that then would involve military.
Oh, this is so funny. You want to see the abuse I'm getting online. Absolutely hilarious. And that couple of Africans, I think. I don't know, the English is that bad. I can't understand what they're trying to say. Oh, this is a protest in Tel Aviv.
We've seen, of course, the reports that a ground invasion is happening, albeit in stages and in kind of a sporadic fashion. And so, of course, all of these things have to be taken into consideration as part of one process rather than treating them separately.
And the focus for certainly those families is the release of their loved ones, and yet you have I say a range of
avenues
to try and get the captives released. And one avenue that we saw certainly were the Russian line, which is obviously Moscow directly asking Hamas to look for its Russian Israelis or Russian Jews that are in Gaza. And the very tentative reply was, "We will look for them," which gives you the possibility of a question of, does Hamas really have all of the captives, or are they with other groups or other civil society individuals who might have just captured Israelis and brought them back into Gaza? It's a real big question mark about where the captives are and who's got them.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I think this has been part of the challenge of trying to think and talk about all of these events going back several weeks is just how sporadic the information has been, how incomplete it quite often is. I think this has been really frustrating for those who are trying to get as much accurate information and to then work on the basis of that information in order to secure results. And so we're certainly seeing conflicting reports. We're seeing an inability to account in a very kind of precise way in terms of both numbers, in terms of nationalities, backgrounds, in terms of location. I mean, all of these things are still very much fluid in part because of the conditions are simply not allowing for that. I mean, we just heard from the correspondent about the lack of communication and what that has meant, even for people within Gaza who are trying, to secure their own safety in light of these bombardments, the inability to even achieve medical.
How am I lying?
The lack of communication. And so even first responders are not in any position to respond even to some of these bombing campaigns that are being discovered in sometimes many hours, in fact, the next day. So I think this is all sort of part of the same process, the inability to really understand what's going on in any kind of a precise way.
We'll continue to unpick this throughout the day with you, Abdullah Al-Aran. Thanks for joining us here on Al Jazeera. Still ahead here on the News Hour, we'll be live in Islamabad, where demonstrations are being held to show solidarity with Palestinians in Gaza.
Hello, all. Portugal is under a weather alert for torrential downpours. All has to do with this moisture streaming in off the Atlantic, cutting across into western Spain. So just to the west of Madrid, also weather alerts in play for these pulses of rain. North of this, also soggy forecasts for the islands of Ireland and Britain, especially western England, eastern England, and northeastern Scotland, where we could see about a month's worth of rain in a short period of time. And as this precipitation bumps into colder air, it will turn to snow in Latvia, so a few centimeters on the ground in Riga. For the Balkans, few clouds rolling across. Temperatures not bad though, and out to Turkey we go. Few clouds rolling across the Bosphorus, and Istanbul may see the odd shower there with a high of 23 degrees. And in Africa, eventually we're going to pump up hot air from the Sahara, so that will push up the temperature in Tripoli over the next 24 hours. And it is very active for the eastern side of South Africa. Rain alerts in play, wind alerts as well. And we're also going to be dealing with some snow for Lesotho. Big drop in those temperatures, but we've got some hot air coming up to Zambia. Lusaka could set a temperature record for the month of October on Sunday before your temperatures fall off.
Watching Al Jazeera's news hour with me, Sahil Rahman. A reminder of our top stories. Thousands of desperate Palestinians have resorted to breaking into distribution centres in Gaza to take food and other basic supplies. The UN says civil order is collapsing and nowhere in the Strip is safe. Israel continued its air and ground attacks on Gaza overnight on Saturday. Communication networks across the territory have been completely severed, but some services are now being restored. And the violence spread beyond Gaza overnight in the occupied West Bank. At least 3 Palestinians were killed during Israeli raids. More than 1,500 Palestinians have been detained in the West Bank since October. Now, as Palestinians face increasing conflict at home, hundreds of thousands of people continue to take part in solidarity rallies around the world. We're expecting large protests in Germany, Spain, Canada, and the US. Already today, we've seen demonstrations in Sydney, Casablanca, Beirut, and Islamabad in Pakistan, from where I'm joined now by Kamal Haider. And Kamal, protests...
Yeah, all these protests prove is how stupid the human race is.
...will be heard beyond the very high walls of that security perimeter.
This protest won't change Israel. It won't change any other government's mind. Israel will not listen to anyone, not even their own people. So the point of these protests is what? The point of these protests is to make a 5-minute TikTok video, YouTube video, Facebook video, whatever, hope to get monetized by it and hope to live off it for the rest of their lives, or because they went for a protest. But all that'll happen is anybody who monetizes anything to do with the war between Israel and Gaza will just get demonetized and nobody will buy from the adverts anyway. This is another reason the world's collapsed, because people will not support Israel or American companies now, because they're paying taxes. America is then giving it to Israel to kill innocent women and children. It's nonsense. When will the world actually wake up and actually do something to actually help each other? They're all protesting on the streets, and then next week they'll all be begging for food because they've got no jobs to go buy food. And then food banks like me will say, no, get off, we're closed. Interested. Self-inflicted injury. You went to protest in your country, in your town. You stopped companies from earning money, so they had to fire all their staff. So you've brought it on yourselves. Luckily, this is only a minority of people, not the majority.
Large rallies are also planned in support of Palestine in Lebanon's capital, Beirut. While in the south, back and forth bombardments continue between Hezbollah and Israel. Zena Khoda is in Beirut for us with more. The strength of feeling in Lebanon is very strong. Who's been organising or behind the demonstrations there? We seem to have a slight sound problem there.
My YouTube hasn't failed.
As soon as we can. Let's just talk about the demonstrations with our guest here, Abdullah Al-Arian from Georgetown University. They are growing in number and they are becoming more widespread and unprecedented numbers, whether it be London or Washington, New York, Sydney, Auckland, and Islamabad, as we're seeing now. The focus is very much and has always been the Palestinian issue, but momentum can easily be lost. How do you see these progressing or getting bigger or even smaller?
Well, certainly, I think given the scale of the atrocities that are being committed, now we're talking about something on the order of a genocidal campaign when we consider the statements that are coming out of Israeli leaders, including the prime minister just last night, who was talking in very kind of dark and kind of genocidal terms when we actually consider the language that he was using. I think this means that the entire global focus is very much fixated on what's to come next, because we've seen this before, right? When the Israeli prime minister talks about this as being a second war of independence, we know that 1948 was the original Nakba, that this was the process of expelling half of Palestine's population. 750,000 people were made homeless over the course of that war, in part through this massive expansion and the kind of settler colonial violence that was inflicted by the state of Israel. And so now we're seeing promises of a second Nakba by many Israeli leaders. I think this is certainly showing
Right.
the world.
Let's talk about the protests in Beirut. They've been ordered there by Hamas, so it means nothing. Let's talk about the protests in Turkey yesterday. That was ordered by the president. So again, that protest has no authority whatsoever, because both Turkey and Beirut ordered their people to protest. That mean nothing.
For the Ministry of Health,
which has shown that there are a lot of lies from Israel and from America as well. The evidence are very clear, and we have told the entire world about the numbers and about the lies of the
What exactly have you won?
U.S. administration. The return of the communication system and the internet this morning made it clear that the Israeli forces have made a lot of massacres, and everyone has seen the ambulances and the civil defense vehicles are being targeted, in addition to a lot of people who lost their lives. Israel is increasing the threat to hit more hospitals and medical centers, including around 100,000 medical staff, in addition to the sick people and the wounded people. They are all under the threat of being targeted without international intervention. We ask and urge the international community to stop the Israeli aggression and to stop its attacks against the displaced people. Regarding the medical aid and assistance, we confirm that nothing new is happening regarding the medical assistance that are needed by the Ministry of Health. We urge all parties concerned to be up to the responsibilities to do their job in order to be able to serve and help and treat the wounded and the victims and the sick people. We need to do our job in this regard. We ask our brothers in Egypt to reopen the Rafah crossing and to let it work in order to have the medical assistance regularly to help us. And also, we need some of the critically wounded people to be able to go and treated in Egypt. Thousands of displaced are in the hospitals, which made it very critical to the health system in Gaza to be able to do the job needed. Medical teams and general health teams have monitored thousands of victims with skin diseases and diarrhea, and we warn against the spread of epidemics because of the lack of water, and without water they cannot take care of the hygiene rules. 23 days have led the medical authorities to lose control and not to be able to do the job. We in the Ministry of Health, we urge the graduates of medicine schools, the retired of medicine schools and nursing schools, to join us immediately, to join the hospitals immediately, and to help the medical teams in these hospitals and centers. And we urge our people to start blood donation in hospitals and in blood donation branches in Gaza. We ask the National Medicine Organization to bring more blood to the Gaza Strip. The Ministry of Health urges the citizens of Gaza who have lost some of their families without their names be mentioned in the lists of the Ministry of Health, and also those who are still under the rubble, those who have been buried without letting the hospitals know, those who went to the hospitals and are not registered for whatever reason. We call them all to contact the Ministry of Health on this free number 103 00 67253 in order to complete all the registration requirements, and peace be upon you.
Well, that seems to be the end of the press conference from Dr. Ashraf Al-Qudra there from the Health Ministry, urging graduates to come forward to help with medical aid, also an appeal for blood donations, and also asking the international community to put pressure on Israel to make sure they stop targeting health facilities. One of the most telling points, as I'd like to ask Abdullah Al-Aran, Associate Professor of Middle East History at Georgetown, who's still with us here, was that the doctor actually mentioned that he wanted the Rafah border crossing open so that those with critical injuries could be treated. It's a question that we're often asked, on our travels and on at Al Jazeera by our viewers globally, is why can that simple task of the Rafah border crossing between Gaza and Egypt not be open? It seems the logical thing to do.
Well, it would be, but I think that part of the problem has been the fact that Egypt doesn't even have control over its own borders. And I think this is one of the open secrets that's been part of the fact of the stranglehold and the blockade that's been enforced over Gaza for going on 17 years now. So this wasn't a crisis that began just a few weeks ago. We've seen this blockade in effect practiced by both Egypt and Israel at the same time, and in part going back this period through whatever president happens to be there, whether it was Hosni Mubarak or now under Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, that this has been part and parcel of Egypt's policy. Now, in terms of why doing this, I think certainly that it ceded some of its own agency, some of its own autonomy, in part through the Camp David peace treaty that goes back to the late 1970s. In part, Egyptians, for instance, are not able to have a real force in Sinai itself, in its own territory, doesn't control its own border with Gaza. And certainly we know that Egypt is a recipient of over $2 billion in U.S. aid every year, making it the second largest recipient of aid after only Israel being the first, of course. And so in that sense, I think there are serious questions about how Egypt is clearly not playing a very constructive role in terms of the overall treatment of Palestinians. And we've certainly seen the tension between ordinary Egyptians who've rallied by the tens of thousands, not just in recent weeks, but really over the years, in opposition to what the Egyptian state has done in terms of its enforcement of the siege.
Abdullah, thank you very much. And just an update really on figures that we're getting from the Health Ministry in Gaza. 8,000 now is the death toll in the Gaza Strip. That's according to the Health Ministry in Gaza. We'll, of course, continue to bring you more on that through the day. Let's cross over back to Zaina Khodda, who's in Beirut. We were going to speak to her about the many rallies that are going on around the world, including in the Lebanese capital. Who's actually you're actually driving this particular demonstration, Zaina, because there's a great deal of very strong feeling about what's going on in Gaza.
Well, no doubt, many Lebanese do empathize with the Palestinian cause, and they've been watching in horror the scenes from Gaza, the relentless bombardment, the killing of women and children. This particular protest is being organized by Hamas. We are in central Beirut. Many people here are Palestinians as well, because Lebanon has...
This protest has been... See, this proves how much Al Jazeera lie. This protest has been organised by Hamas. Yes, it's in Beirut. Beirut is nothing to do with Hamas. Beirut is run by Hezbollah. So it just proves how much Al Jazeera lie. I just twigged what she said.
So a show of support, a show of solidarity, but there's also a message of defiance here. Hamas leaders saying that Israel at the end will be defeated and will not be able to achieve anything by its ground assault, and its stated goal of destroying Hamas will not happen. So a message of solidarity, but at the same time, a lot of defiance.
Indeed, and while that solidarity continues, there is also a great deal of tension on the border between Lebanon and Israel. That's having an impact on those that actually live and work there.
Yes, the United Nations are saying nearly 30,000 people have been displaced by the ongoing conflict in the border area, a rise of nearly 40% in the past week alone. Yes, those villages along the border are now empty. People have lost their livelihoods. People are concerned that this could be a protracted conflict. Yes, many Lebanese will emphasize with the Palestinian cause, but there are many others who are against Lebanon being dragged into this conflict. What is happening along the border is a war between the Israeli military and Hezbollah, an ally of Iran, a group which has repeatedly said Gaza will not fall, Gaza will not be left alone. It's still not clear whether or not Hezbollah plans to escalate its involvement, get more involved, and that would mean the conflict moving deeper inside Lebanese territory. So mixed feelings among Lebanese who actually were here witnessed the 2006 war between the Israeli military and Hezbollah, which caused really a lot of devastation. But today the economy has all but collapsed and people are struggling, and so is the state. But no doubt, the majority of the people in this country are supporting the Palestinian people as, with these relentless Israeli bombardments and the fact that aid has not been able to reach them.
Silicon Forest in Beirut, thank you. Now, the Israeli army says 3 rockets were fired from Lebanon into northern Israel on Saturday. The missiles landed in open areas. No damage or injuries have been reported. The Israeli army says it's targeted a Hezbollah site. Well, Ali Hashim is our correspondent, live for us in Nakura in southern Lebanon. Just bring us up to speed, Ali, on the situation there, because as we said with Zaina, it's impacting on the lives of people that depend on the land of southern Lebanon.
Well, Suhail, over the border from here to the east, there are Israeli shelling going on since this morning. Now, every now and then you hear, but mainly in Kfar Shuba there is shelling, and also towards an area called Al-Abbad, towards the central sector. Close to here there was shelling at the beginning of the day, but now there's nothing. However, this is all, of course, related to this situation where South Lebanon now is an operation zone, and the situation is tense, and many people decided, as they were saying, to leave. Yesterday alone, there were several attacks on Israeli military posts across the border by Hezbollah fighters. Now, also the United Nations announced that
this protest was organized by Hamas. Yeah, it's in Beirut. Beirut is in Lebanon. Telling you, Al Jazeera are so funny. And then they wonder why all their reporters get killed in jail, or their officers get bombed.
Of course, I mean, over the past 17 years, since the last war with Israel in 2006, people got used to having their lands just on the border, directly on the border. And now it's October, people are preparing, or were preparing for the olive harvest. Later on, they will grind it, they will have oil out of it. And this was a main income for families here in the south, and also for other families around Lebanon, but mainly here in the south, on the border. People were waiting this season. Now with this situation, and with Israel targeting agricultural lands, open lands, trees, this is becoming very complicated. Either the lands are bought by the Israeli shelling, either people can come to this side of the border in order to harvest or to bring the olive, whatever they need. So this is creating a situation where there's more pressure, especially that we know Lebanon's been going through economic hardships over the past 3-4 years. And this used to help people here in the south to get more income. So the olive season will maybe add $3,000-4,000 for a normal family a year. This would mean a lot in such situation. And now with these money gone, and now they have to pay more money because some of them are displaced, going to family.
Yeah, that's it. Joey, I was trying to think of the third one. Out of Friends. Joey, Chandler and Russ.
Ali Hashimfor is there in Nakura in southern Lebanon. Thank you. Now let's recap the latest death toll in Gaza. The health ministry has just announced that at least 8,005 Palestinians have been killed in Israel's bombing of Gaza since the war began on October 7th. It says 112 have been killed in the occupied West Bank in nearly 3 weeks, and 2 Palestinian prisoners died in Israeli custody. Israel says that was due to natural causes. The Israeli government says more than 1,400 Israelis were killed in Hamas' attack 3 weeks ago. Well, let's bring in Abdullah Al-Arian again, Middle East professor at Georgetown University. Let's just take the conversation slightly towards the Lebanese area, because in Netanyahu's press conference yesterday, when he was talking about Hamas, he said 90% of their funding comes from Iran. Iran has close associations with Hezbollah, who operate in southern Lebanon, and where these clashes are going on right now. It is a very delicate picture of how this situation can exacerbate over a very short period of time if all the state actors are not controlled in some shape or form.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, there is this kind of fear, this idea that perhaps this could expand into some sort of regional conflict that would involve many other actors. We know the U.S. has also ramped up its presence in the Mediterranean and across different states in this region where it has a presence already. We know Iran, and certainly the language that's coming out of the leadership there has been very much attempting to draw certain red lines as far as what this means for Gaza. But I think this is really where the conversation always turns back, which is depending on how things unfold and continue to escalate in the days ahead, will determine the potential involvement of all of these other actors. And I think this is why it's so urgent for the will of the UN Security, or the UN General Assembly rather than the Security Council, as it was expressed in that resolution, demanding an immediate ceasefire and certainly de-escalating the situation in response, largely obviously, to the mass casualties that are being reported out of Gaza.
What sort of strength does Hezbollah have in terms of, we don't really know specifics all the time really with groups like this, but in terms of the impact that they have, certainly in southern Lebanon it's very strong, but when it comes to the potential for this ongoing skirmish with Israel in its northern border, it is there at the moment, isn't it? And it's bubbling under.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I think, people generally take the 2006 war as a frame of reference, one in which, although there was mass devastation within Lebanon, but certainly the kind of outcome tended to be that there was an ability to repel the incursion on the part of the Lebanese, forces there. And so I think in that sense, there's a assumption that in that span of time, in the last 16, 17 years, that their capabilities have only expanded. And so I think this is why there's probably this sense of caution that we're seeing both on the part of Israel, not necessarily wanting to expand to a northern front, one in which it would probably face a much more capable opposition than what it's accustomed to in terms of Gaza, given the fact that obviously it's besieged and far more limited in terms of capability. So I think in that sense, there is this kind of attempt to establish a sort of deterrent capability.
Israel is burning southern Lebanon again.
Sporadic attacks that we're seeing. Obviously now it's even implicating United Nations facilities that are there that are being shelled by Israel as well. We've seen the killing of a journalist who was simply there reporting in the south of Lebanon.
Is it 11 o'clock yet?
A couple of weeks ago. So certainly the escalation has been there, although it hasn't unfolded into an all-out.
And of course, in the past couple of days, we've also seen the US take action, saying it's independent of what's going on in Gaza, but hitting bases and locations that are affiliated to Iranian-backed groups. There is this sort of scenario of always talking about like a proxy war, a proxy scenario. Again, how important is it, and how dangerous are we at a position of getting third parties involved like Iran and the US into something that perhaps could be contained or could be solved?
Yeah, I mean, I think again it goes back to this idea of whether there will be a real political will for a ceasefire in the kind of coming hours and days. I think this is why it's so crucial to kind of be pushing this specific position that we've seen 120 nations have signed.
This is repeated
for that statement.
This is repeated bombing. This isn't real.
To implement this.
This is Al Jazeera posting fake news as normal.
Of course, the fact that it continues to allow for Israel to commit the mass atrocities in Gaza. So I think depending on how things escalate there, certainly we could see a much more frightful.
Right. Let's talk about the raid on the aid warehouse. How do we know that wasn't staged by Al Jazeera and then all the food goes back into trucks, and when the camera's gone, it all goes back into the aid shelter? See, it's just Al Jazeera spreading fake news, normal. I don't know why Al Jazeera are so, and I don't know why Al Jazeera are so anti-Israel. I understand why their officers keep getting bombed and why their reporters keep getting shot, and I understand why their reporters are in jail, because basically they're spies acting for another government.
101 East follows some mothers desperately trying to reunite with their children on Al Jazeera.
Boazki Protich is a high school student in Iten. He wakes up early morning to tend to his family's 2 cows before heading to class. But his school is 8 kilometers away, through a forest and across huge stones.
We have now walked for about 5 kilometers. This is the most difficult.
What am I packing in?
Many students here journey to school with purpose. They want to be runners. They are inspired by top athletes who come from Iten. This is an area famous for producing some of the world's best long-distance runners, such as Eliud Kipchoge.
I always run home to school and compete in school races.
I like the 3,000-meter run. I feel I can help my family through such races. Life is difficult at home.
Their teachers say they show great promise despite the hardships they face.
Amidst the world slowdown, we stand firm as home to a fifth of global nickel reserves. Indonesia is poised to lead the global EV battery industry. We adeptly manage our abundant resources and play a vital role in solar energy harnessing, offering 75% of global carbon credit potential, committed to environmental protection, enhancing investment climate through digital licensing. Indonesia, your better tomorrow.
Short documentaries from around the world that celebrate courage and resilience in times of turmoil. Al Jazeera Selects on Al Jazeera. Desperation in Gaza. Thousands of hungry Palestinians break into UN warehouses taking meat, flour, and other basic goods. Hello there, I'm Nastasia Tay. This is Al Jazeera live from Doha. Also coming up, Israeli airstrikes continue to devastate the strip. More than 8,000 Palestinians in Gaza have now lost their lives. Israel's Prime Minister warns the war on Gaza will be long and difficult and says Israeli forces are expanding their ground operations. At least 3 Palestinians have been killed by the Israeli military in the occupied West Bank. Dozens more are injured. And showing solidarity, people take to the streets around the world to protest against this war on Gaza. Well, it is now 11 GMT. That's 1 p.m. in the afternoon in Gaza, where conditions for 2.3 million Palestinians trapped in the territory are rapidly deteriorating. For the 23rd day now, Israel has continued its relentless bombardment, More than 8,000 Palestinians have now been confirmed dead since this war broke out. The UN chief says that number is totally unacceptable. On the ground, the UN says civil order is collapsing and some of its warehouses have been looted of food and essential supplies. Stephanie Decker rounds up the latest.
A desperate scramble for supplies. This is survival mode. People broke through the doors of this UN warehouse in southern Gaza. It's chaos.
We need fresh water. We need food. We're starving. This is totally unfair. Our children can't sleep from hunger and thirst. We need to provide food and water for them.
We have no flour, no aid, no water, not even toilets. Our houses were destroyed. No one cares about us. We appeal to the people of the world. All international powers are against us. We needed aid, and we wouldn't have done this if we weren't in need.
Israel has cut off all food and water imports to the Strip. There is a trickle that occasionally enters through Egypt's Rafah crossing, but it's not enough. The UN has warned of a humanitarian disaster. It has been warning that for years, and somehow, every year, things get worse. It's the early hours of Sunday morning. The time means nothing here anymore. Nasser Hospital in Khan Yunis is at breaking point. May God please protect and preserve our people, this old man cries. There is nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. Penned in. This a war like Gaza has never seen. People use their bare hands to desperately search for survivors. But even the smallest of lives stand little chance against Israel's firepower. And the daylight brings no relief. Death comes suddenly. Death comes consistently. And it comes from the air here. Time in Gaza is now measured between explosions, and between life and death. Stephanie Decker, Al Jazeera.
Well, since this war began on October the 7th, Israel's bombing campaign across the territory has killed 8,005 Palestinians. That's according to the Palestinian Health Ministry. It says 112 have also been killed in the occupied West Bank in nearly 3 weeks, and 2 Palestinian prisoners have died in Israeli custody. Israel says that was due to natural causes. The Israeli government says more than 1,400 Israelis were killed in Hamas's attack 3 weeks ago. Well, let's be
People have died in prison from natural causes. Yeah, I don't think so.
Honey, it must be a great relief for so many that communications are finally back up after, what was it, 2 days? Do we know how they were restored?
No, the only reason the communications is back up is because they've stopped the bombing, so the pressure's gone back to normal, which means the cell.
Well, yes, it's a great relief for so many people who waited eagerly for news about the connectivity being turned on again. We know that cables and cell towers and infrastructure in the central part of Gaza were completely damaged due to heavy airstrikes in the area, and another installation in the Gaza Strip was completely destroyed, leaving an entire Gaza Strip in total blackout. That would happen. Speculations and fear among people that this is the beginning of something atrocious as Gaza was put off the grid. Now, we heard it from a source at PalTel. It's the official Palestinian telecommunication company who expressed their frustration at what happened, because it was since the beginning of the war, the airstrikes, the Israeli bombardment and airstrikes that destroyed most of the company's installations, leaving it with one installation covering the entire Gaza Strip. And just to let you know, just for the past 2 weeks, communication was difficult. It would take many times, many tries just to make a phone call or send a text message, let alone being online using the internet. But one installation that was left was completely destroyed, and then the company resorted to a basic alternatives just to connect people back again, and just to help organizations such as the UNRWA and the Red Cross in managing its operations on the ground. We heard some of the really horrible stories of lack of communications between the organization and their teams on the ground, and people who were trying to reach them to report about a lacking of basic needs and supplies caused a huge problem. And we've seen in the past the past 24 hours, 1,000 of Palestinians just breaking into a warehouse of the United Nations, and lots of looting was going on. And when people were asked about what was going on, they were just taking what they needed to sustain them throughout the day. The situations are very, very dreadful and unescapable for many Palestinians. A lot of people are afraid they're going to starve if food supplies continue to be blocked.
Hani Mahmoud there with that report for us from the ground, from Khan Yunis, inside the Gaza Strip. Thank you so much, Hani. Well, we can now speak to Juliet Tuma. She is the Communications Director for UNRWA, the UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees. She joins us now from Amman and Jordan. Juliet, just talking a little more about the looting of these warehouses, your warehouses, what sort of scale are we talking about here, and what's the situation now with some of the other distribution sites?
I don't have that level of information, and what is really important about what happened yesterday is the level of despair and frustration that people feel that led them to break into the UNRWA warehouses. It is a worrying sign of a beginning of a fall of civil order in Gaza, but it's equally the highest levels of despair among the people after 3 weeks of very high siege and a very, very vicious war.
Juliet, we've just been hearing there from our correspondent Hani about how anxious people have been, especially during the communications blackout over the last couple of days, not knowing how or where to access supplies or when they would receive them. How much did that contribute to this? And as you say, this disintegration of civil order?
I think the cuts that we've seen in Gaza of communications, including internet and other types of cuts, have isolated the people of Gaza from their families within the Gaza Strip, but also from the rest of the world. It also isolated us as UNRWA because we could not have a stable line of contact, and also interrupted our humanitarian operations.
Well, speaking of interruptions to your operation, I know only a tiny, tiny proportion of what's needed in terms of aid has actually made it into the Strip. How quickly is it being distributed? I know you've also lost many of your staff there. I'm so sorry. I know that must be very difficult on multiple levels, but it also has consequences on what you can do.
Oh, absolutely. We have, as of this morning, the total number of colleagues who have been killed in the war in Gaza since the 7th of October, only since the 7th of October, only in this war is 59. And that is believed to be the highest number of UN people killed in such a short span of time in any conflict around the world. These were teachers, school principals, engineers, one doctor, very many support staff who are the backbone of our operation in Gaza. So many challenges, yes, also because our staff themselves have been impacted and have been displaced. When we get those very, very little supplies that are coming on these trucks, we do everything possible to pick them up from the borders, even if it's nighttime, even if airstrikes are ongoing, and we put them in the warehouse and then start the distribution as soon as we can. But I really want to say that these trucks are not enough. I mean, we had just over 80 trucks in more than a week. I mean, it's nothing. So Gaza before the war used to get every single day 500 trucks. Now we have 84 in 1 week. It's nothing.
Well, Juliet, I know one of the strictest conditions that the Israelis put on aid in order to even allow it to enter Gaza was that it would not be given to Hamas, that Hamas would have no access. Is there a concern that the looting of warehouses now might give Israel any kind of reason to restrict aid, citing security reasons?
I don't know. I don't know. What I do know is that we need more supplies, that people in Gaza, civilians in Gaza need more supplies, that UNRWA needs more supplies. It needs fuel as well for us to be able to continue our humanitarian operation. Supplies are running out and we need more supplies, and we need those convoys to have more trucks on them and to have fuel on them and to be more frequent. Yesterday, because of the communications breakdown, we could not coordinate for the convoy. So there was no convoy yesterday into the Gaza Strip.
Juliet, you mentioned their fuel. Your agency was warning earlier this week that if you received no fuel, you would have had to halt your operations in Gaza. I believe that was on Wednesday night. So what's the situation now?
We have rationed the use of fuel. We continue to call for fuel, and we continue to call for fuel to be included as part of the humanitarian convoys that are being sent into Gaza.
Juliet Tumala, the Communications Director for UNRWA, the UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees. Thank you so much for joining us on Al Jazeera. Juliet, thank you for your time, and we wish you all the best with your work. Well, the Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, addressed the nation, meanwhile, on Saturday, saying that the war against Hamas has entered a new stage. Alan Fisher has more now from occupied East Jerusalem.
Despite growing calls for a ceasefire, Israel has entered a new phase of the war in Gaza. The Prime Minister is not using the word invasion, but troops are on the ground. The bombardment of the Strip is ferocious and continuous.
We are going to fight on land, in the air, and sea. We will win. It will be victory of the good against the evil. In this war, we are standing together strongly.
Netanyahu was facing questions from the media for the first time since the attacks on October the 7th. He warned his country of a long and difficult campaign, but again refused to accept he was responsible for the failures that led to the Hamas attack.
After the war, we will all have to give answers, everyone, including myself. There was a failure, a horrible failure.
The military campaign has brought people onto the streets of Tel Aviv in protest. Many relatives of the missing or those being held captive. They believe the ferocious bombardment is making it harder for them to be freed. Before his nationally televised news conference, Netanyahu met representatives of the families. Now 230 people, say the Israelis. He told them the military campaign was about exerting pressure.
We will exercise and exhaust every option to bring them home, both before the army's entry and after.
It's understood negotiations to free the captives are continuing, but complicated by the continuing assault on Gaza. There are growing calls for an end to the war in Gaza, growing protests in capitals around the world. Benny Gantz, a member of the Israeli War Cabinet, says there is no diplomatic time limit on this, just an operational clock. And this is just the second stage of a war that has already claimed thousands of lives. Alan Fisher, Al Jazeera, in occupied East Jerusalem.
Sarah Khairat has more for us now from occupied East Jerusalem.
There's a war on the ground happening in Gaza, and there's certainly been a war of words between Benjamin Netanyahu and those included in his war cabinet. It all started when in the middle of the night the Prime Minister had tweeted basically blaming the intelligence and military for the October 7 attack, for not being able to prevent it. And then soon after in the morning, I guess, when some of his cabinet members saw it, they tweeted about it, saying that this has crossed a red line. You had Benny Gantz, one of the war cabinet members and also a former defense minister, asking him to retract it. You had the leader of the opposition, Yair Lapid, saying that this has crossed a red line. then after that, we saw that Netanyahu did delete it, and then he apologized publicly for it. This has been happening all in the public sphere on social media. He said that he had made a mistake. Interestingly, he apologized for the tweets and said that we are together in this, in the war, and that he will ensure that they are staying united, but hasn't yet, so despite criticism, apologized himself or taken any of the blame for not being able to prevent that attack at a time when this so-called unity government is supposed to be united in times of war. Benny Gantz himself said that in war, the leadership has to take responsibility and help move this country and war forward off the back of that attack.
Well, in the occupied West Bank, at least 3 have been killed during Israeli raids overnight. We can speak to Imran Khan. He's in Ramallah in the occupied West Bank for us. Imran, as we've been saying, the death toll in the occupied West Bank has been mounting over these last few weeks as well. Tell us about these latest raids.
Well, the raids took place overnight, but before I tell you about those, there is a raid ongoing right now just south of Bethlehem. This raid took place around about an hour ago and is still ongoing, so I'll update you about that a little bit later. But Askar refugee camp was the first raid late at night. A 25-year-old Palestinian was killed and 10 others were wounded in that raid. In the town of Tamun in Tubas, a 32-year-old Palestinian was killed and 7 others injured. And in Beth Rima, near Ramallah, where I am right now, a 30-year-old Palestinian was killed and 11 others were injured. Some 35 people have been arrested in those raids. So the death toll now stands around 114, but the arrests have actually shot up. We're looking at about 1,590 arrests since October the 7th, some 6,600 total Palestinians in Israeli jails right now. That's the highest it's been in about 20 years. And of that figure, 1,800 are held under administrative detention. That means they're held without charge.
Nimran, you were also telling us a little earlier about a fairly notable diplomatic visit that's taking place today.
A complete surprise, in fact. The Bahraini Foreign Minister, Zanania, actually was in Oman on Saturday. He met with King Abdullah of Jordan. We thought that was going to be the end of his visit, but 2 hours ago, he flew in on a Jordanian helicopter and met with the Palestinian President, Mahmoud Abbas. Officially, they're saying that this is a visit to show solidarity with the Palestinian people and to condemn the attacks on Gaza. But this is an interesting visit because Bahrain has full diplomatic relations with Israel. It has no relations officially with the Palestinian Authority. It's a signatory to the Abraham Accords, which allowed a number of Arab nations to actually have diplomatic relations with Israel. And so this visit is being considered with some suspicion by some of the more cynical political analysts who suggest that maybe he's coming with a message from Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, and that's one of the routes he's doing it. Certainly publicly, this is a visit that suggests that he's showing unity with the Palestinian people, and he's not due to go to Israel at all. In fact, after this meeting is over, which should happen within the next 20 minutes or so, he's flying straight back to Oman.
Very interesting. Imran Khan there for us in Ramallah in the occupied West Bank. Thank you, Imran. Well, still ahead here on Al Jazeera. We'll be shortly live in Beirut, where demonstrations are being held to show their solidarity with Palestinians in Gaza.
Hello, all of Portugal is under a weather alert for torrential downpours. All has to do with this moisture streaming in off the Atlantic, cutting across into western Spain. So just to the west of Madrid, also weather alerts in play for these pulses of rain. North of this, also a soggy forecast for the islands of Ireland and Britain, especially Western England, Eastern England, and Northeastern Scotland, where we could see about a month's worth of rain in a short period of time. And as this precipitation bumps into colder air, it will turn to snow in Latvia, so a few centimeters on the ground in Riga. For the Balkans, few clouds rolling across. Temperatures not bad, though, and off to Turkey we go. Clouds rolling across the Bosphorus, and Istanbul may see the odd shower there with a high of 23 degrees. And in Africa, eventually we're going to pump up hot air from the Sahara, so that will push up the temperature in Tripoli over the next 24 hours, and it is very active for the eastern side of South Africa. Rain alerts in play, wind alerts as well, and we're also going to be dealing with some snow for Lesotho. Big drop in those temperatures, but we've got some hot air coming up to Zambia. Lusaka could set a temperature record for the month of October on Sunday before your temperatures fall off.
While you're watching Al Jazeera, let's remind you of our headlines this hour. More than 8,000 Palestinians in Gaza have now lost their lives. Thousands of desperate people have resorted to breaking into aid distribution centers in Gaza to take food and other basic supplies. The UN says civil order is collapsing and that nowhere in the Strip is safe. Israel continued its air and ground attacks on Gaza overnight on Saturday. Communication networks across the territory had been completely severed, but some services are now being restored. The violence also spread beyond Gaza overnight. In the occupied West Bank, at least 3 Palestinians were killed during Israeli raids. More than 1,500 Palestinians have been detained in the occupied West Bank since October the 7th. Well, as Palestinians face conflict at home, hundreds of thousands of people are taking part in solidarity rallies around the world to show support for their plight. Large protests are expected in Germany, Spain, Canada, and the US, but already on Sunday, demonstrations have been held in Sydney, Casablanca, Beirut, and Islamabad. Large protests are planned in support of Palestine in Lebanon's capital, Beirut, ongoing, while in the country's south, Hezbollah and Israel are continuing to fight. Let's speak to Zaina Potter. She's in the Lebanese capital. Zaina, we know the strength they're feeling in Lebanon is extremely strong. Talk us through who's been organizing these demonstrations then.
Well, for the past 3 weeks, we have been seeing protests, rallies, gatherings being organized by different parties in Lebanon. This particular one is being organized by Hamas. We are in downtown Beirut. Many of the people here are Palestinians. Lebanon is host to a sizable Palestinian refugee population. These are the children of those who were forced to leave their homes in 1948 when the State of Israel was created. People here say they can no longer sit in silence and watch the horrors, the scenes coming from Gaza. They are angry. They're angry at Western leaders. They're also angry at Arab leaders. They say that the support, the unwavering support that they've been giving to the Israelis allow what they are calling the genocide to continue in Gaza. And there's a lot of anger towards Arab leaders saying that it's a shame that the Israeli flag continues to be hoisted in some Arab capitals. So this is a show of solidarity, support, condemnation, but there's also a lot of defiance. Hamas leaders in Lebanon, as well as ordinary people, believe at the end of the day, what they call the resistance will be able to win this war, and Israel will not be able to achieve its objective. And one of those stated objectives is to destroy Hamas.
Zaina, how are people there in the capital feeling about what's happening now on the southern border?
Well, like I mentioned, many in Lebanon empathize with the Palestinian cause, but many are also worried that this country could be dragged into conflict. They do not want Hezbollah, a group which is allied with Hamas, to drag this country into war. They believe that Lebanon will not be able to withstand the Israeli attacks. They remember what happened in 2006. That was the last war when Israel leveled villages in southern Lebanon, as well as Hezbollah's stronghold here in the capital, the southern suburbs of Beirut. But Hezbollah remains defiant. It is saying that Gaza will not fall. Gaza is not alone. So far, what is happening in the south is limited, contained. Hezbollah treading very carefully, but it's hard to say whether or not Hezbollah will engage, will take a step further and escalate the situation. This is a question on everyone's minds, but every day what we are seeing in the south is this gradual escalation.
Zaina Potter there with the latest for us from the Lebanese capital, Beirut. Thank you, Zain. Well, let's tell you about some other world news now, and at least 2 people have been killed and hundreds more injured in Bangladesh's capital as security forces there fought with opposition protesters. Police have detained the leader of the opposition Bangladesh Nationalist Party. Mirza Fakhrul was reportedly brought in for questioning about the protests on Saturday. The BNP wants the government to step down and hand over power to a caretaker administration ahead of general elections in January. Former US Vice President Mike Pence has ended his 2024 presidential bid. He was far behind in the polls. His former boss, Donald Trump, has a huge lead over all his challengers in the race for next year's Republican Party nomination for president. Pence alienated Trump loyalists by refusing his demands to reject Joe Biden as the winner of the election back in 2020.
But the Bible tells us that there's a time for every purpose under heaven. Traveling across the country over the past 6 months, I came here to say it's become clear to me. This is not my time.
Matthew Perry, one of the stars of the American sitcom Friends, has died at the age of 54. He was reportedly found dead at his Los Angeles home on Saturday. Perry acted in several films, including Fools Rush In and The Whole Nine Yards, but he was best known for his role as Chandler Bing in Friends. He played the character for 10 seasons, featuring in all 234 episodes. South Africa have won the Rugby World Cup for a record 4th time after beating New Zealand in the final in Paris. Large celebrations, as you can see, were held there in Cape Town, following the Springboks' 12-11 victory against the All Blacks. This win makes South Africa the most successful team in the tournament's history. Well, that's it from me, Nastasia Tay. We'll have more shortly about ongoing coverage of the war on Gaza. Inside Story, though, is next, looking at the UN's efforts to bring about a ceasefire. Do stay with us here on Al Jazeera. Thanks for watching.
And here's how it's looking across Asia Pacific, at least. That's where we're going to begin this weather report. Nice to see. We've got some rain in the picture along the border with China and North Korea. This is good news. There are a number of weather alerts in play here for the threat of wildfires, so this will help dampen down that risk. We've got a shot of snow from Mongolia's capital, Ulaanbaatar, on Monday, a few centimeters of snow on the ground. But for China, it's looking more like summer, really for a huge swath of the country in Guangxi province. Guilin, maybe 30 degrees for you on Monday. Quite remarkable when you consider it's almost November. Soggy forecast for southern India through Goa, Kerala, Tamil Nadu states. We've got some thundery downpours in the mix here. But it is a much calmer picture in Pakistan. Temperatures where they should be for this time of year, including in Jacobabad at 33 degrees. So let's go to the Middle East, where there has been some flooding in western Saudi Arabia around Jeddah. That is set to continue with these storms off the Red Sea here. We had quite a bit of rain in Al Ula the other day, but it turns calmer on Monday. And the risk we could see some showers or thunderstorms for us here in Doha, not just on Monday, but Tuesday as well. Your temperature locks in to about 32 or 33. See ya.
The latest news as it breaks.
See the utter chaos, what I can see over the balcony here, anger towards the Palestinian president about what's happening in Gaza.
With detailed coverage.
Around 60,000 people have arrived here. They're afraid, and many here are blaming Benjamin Netanyahu.
From around the world.
Joe Biden was meant to meet with 3 Arab leaders in Jordan, but they essentially cancelled, angry that the US president was not prepared to call for a ceasefire.
The United Nations General Assembly votes overwhelmingly for a ceasefire in Gaza. It came at precisely the same time as Israel was launching its fiercest attacks yet. With the vote showing Israel and the US largely isolated over the war, can world public opinion make a difference? This is Inside Story. Hello there, I'm James Bays. In 3 weeks of war, the United Nations Security Council has failed to take any decision over Israel's relentless attacks on 2.3 million Palestinians in Gaza. If the Security Council is like the Cabinet of the United Nations, the General Assembly is its parliament, the voice of the world's nations. On Friday, it spoke loud and clear. with an overwhelming vote against Israel's bombardment of Gaza. What influence will the first effective measure of official international opinion have on Israel and its main ally, the United States? Could it have any impact on ending the war? We'll be discussing all of this with our panel of guests in a moment. But first, Victoria Gatenby has our report on the UN vote on Gaza.
At almost exactly the same moment as the US ambassador was addressing the United Nations General Assembly, calling for a humanitarian truce between Israelis and Palestinians, Israel began its most intense bombardment of Gaza since the war began, cutting off phone and internet services across the Strip. An amendment sponsored by Canada and the US that would have added language condemning Hamas was voted down, but the 193-member General Assembly passed the main resolution, authored by Jordan and the Arab group.
Is adopted.
It calls for an immediate truce, the release of all civilians, and the uninhibited flow of humanitarian supplies into Gaza.
The General Assembly prevailed and set.
Hey, sorry, I was downstairs. Forgot I left YouTuber.
Send the message to everyone: enough is enough. This war has to stop.
The US was the only major world power that voted against it, along with 13 other countries, including Israel. 45 nations abstained. After the vote, Israel's ambassador accused the UN of, in his words, ensuring, not preventing, further atrocities.
Today is a day that will go.
You don't live in London at all.
We have all witnessed that the UN no longer holds even 1 ounce of legitimacy or relevance.
Resolutions adopted in the General Assembly are non-binding, meaning Israel could ignore it as it's done in the past with few consequences. 3 weeks into the conflict, the UN has finally spoken with one voice. But even with overwhelming support, it's unlikely the resolution will end the bombardment of Gaza. Victoria Gatenby for Inside Story.
Well, let's discuss more on all of this by our panel of guests. And in Ramallah, we have Hanan Ashwari, a Palestinian political leader and former member of the Palestinian Liberation Organization Executive Committee. She was also a member of the Palestinian delegation to the Middle East peace talks in the 1990s. In Johannesburg, Ronnie Kasriels, a former South African government minister and leading member of the African National Congress during the apartheid.
Yeah, you're not going to continue.
It's Malia Lodi, who served as Pakistan's ambassador to the United Kingdom, the United States, and the United Nations. We have a most distinguished panel. Thank you very much for joining us on Inside Story. Ambassador Lodi, Malia, can I ask you first about the General Assembly? Because you served as Pakistan's ambassador to the United Nations. There will be people here who say the General Assembly doesn't have any power, it doesn't do anything. You, during your time as the ambassador, you're actually one of the vice presidents of the General Assembly. So tell me why the General Assembly is important.
I think the General Assembly is important because when there's a deadlock in the Security Council, as we saw, when several resolutions didn't get through, which were aimed at stopping the bloodshed or at least getting a humanitarian pause, then the General Assembly kicks in. It's often called the Parliament of the world, where every country has one vote. And that's a body that really does reflect global opinion. The Security Council, after all, is only made up of 15 members. But the General Assembly, with 193 members, does demonstrate what the world is thinking. And I think what we saw in this resolution and the vote for the resolution was where the world was standing. It was standing on the right side of history. It was conveying that it wants an end to the bloodshed, to the carnage, to the genocide that is going on. And it was a rebuke to those members of the Security Council who used the veto, the United States primarily, to prevent any kind of a ceasefire or any kind of a pause in the fighting. So I think, okay, so the resolution is non-binding, but I think the force of public opinion and global opinion is extremely important. And the world has spoken, and it has spoken decisively against Israel, and it has spoken decisively in favor of peace.
Okay, Helen Ashwari, if I could talk to you about the resolution itself. It took a lot of negotiation led by Jordan of the Arab group. Let me just read out what it called for. An immediate, durable and sustained humanitarian truce, but it also called for humanitarian aid to come in, immediate, continuous, sufficient and unhindered. And interestingly, it specified what should go in: water, food, medical supplies, fuel and electricity. This would be, would it not, for the Palestinian people, wonderful if this was actually complied with?
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's wonderful, but it would be beginning to undo the tremendous injustice and damage and violence that has been inflicted on the Palestinians of Gaza in terms of ending Israel's genocidal siege.
Right, I'll be back later, guys. Gonna go finish washing up.
Of an ordinary life, practically speaking. So, yes, it should have taken place. It shouldn't be